The way you think about learning solos from famous jazz artists is wrong. That's because you've been given bad advice from the very beginning. I remember learning solos and realizing that it didn't magically improve my playing, but once I figured out how to actually learn from the solos, it became a fun way to practice that also boosted my progress. And it hasn't just worked for me, it's improved the sound of hundreds of my students. So in this video, I'm gonna show you a smarter way to learn from solos that actually transforms your phrasing and teach you amazing jazz lines. You've heard it a million times, learn solos from the greats, but the truth is, some of the greatest, like Wes Montgomery and Peter Bernstein, didn't practice like that. They'll tell you later in the video. Let's start with how to pick the right solo before getting rid of the misunderstandings. Let's talk about the biggest trap beginners fall into, picking solos that are way too hard. So I see this all the time. Someone just starting out shows up with a 5-minute Joe Pass solo guitar marathon. Now first, you're of course blown away by the playing, and then reality hits. Frustration, overwhelmed, you probably end up quitting. That's not how you learn jazz, it's how you burn out. So how do you pick a solo that actually helps you grow? Use the 3S rule. It's my go-to way for finding solos that are perfect for beginners. Here's how it works. First S is simple. Start with solos that are straightforward, not on a difficult song or with weird sounds. The easier it is to follow, the faster you'll pick it up. It should also be short. Since the goal is that you learn the whole solo, don't overwhelm yourself with a 4-minute solo on a fast standard. Short solos mean that you actually finish learning them and get better a lot faster. Swinging, so you're learning jazz, so take solos that log in with the groove, no double time or complicated rhythms, and you also want to avoid difficult tempos like ballads or fast swing. Now many don't realize it, but in jazz, a lot of ballad phrasing is double time, which makes it challenging for beginners in several ways. For a lot of jazz beginners, the shorter, medium Grand Green solos, especially on a jazz blues, are great, and you can find similar examples with Wes and early Jim Hall. If you've got favorite beginner-friendly solos, drop them in the comments. We can never have too many solos to check out. Give us those great Kenny Burrell or Barney Kessel suggestions. Let's get into the first mistake most beginners make, and the good news is, it's super easy to fix. I am 99% sure that Joe Pass or Wes Montgomery did not learn solos from a book, and you're much better off learning by ear, even if it's more difficult in the beginning. Now surprisingly, the reason that this is better is not ear training, not in the sense that most people think about that, even if it helps with this as well. Now the main reason is that it is simply the fastest way to learn. The most important things you get from learning a solo, especially when you play along with the recording, are phrasing, swing feel, and dynamics. Those are the secret ingredients that make jazz sound like jazz. And guess what? You won't find any of that in sheet music. They're only in the recording. Now, if you're staring at notes on a page, you're making it harder to focus on how the music is actually played, which is what really matters. You also would not try to learn French only by reading books, not listening to how it is pronounced. Here's the simple truth about learning by ear. When you have to listen and figure out what is being played, you almost absorb the phrasing and the feel automatically, and that's what learning solos is all about. In fact, it is the fastest and most efficient way to get jazz phrasing and jazz feel into your playing. But here's the thing, solos aren't the best way to build your vocabulary and learn new lines. For that, you need a different approach, and that's exactly how Wes Montgomery thinks about it as well. Let's dive into how that works. Here's another common misunderstanding. A lot of players think that learning entire solos will magically give them new vocabulary for their own improvisations, but that's not how it works. Now, I did a video with Pritesh Walia where he talks about this, and if you start learning solos, you will run into this as well.
Because I've realized most of my students play so much and they'd learn a transcription, come to me and I'd be like, wow, this is insane that you can play an entire Joe Pass transcription top to bottom, no problem. And then I'd call out a tune or some tune that they've been working on and I'd ask them to play it. None of the vocabulary actually shows up in their playing. And it kind of makes me wonder how they can play exactly what Joe Pass played, but none of the ideas or fragments actually show up in their playing.
Most people will tell you that the whole point of learning solos is to play better lines, but if all you do with the solo is learning to play it, you're going to be disappointed. It's a bit like practicing arpeggios and expecting them to magically appear in your solos. They won't unless you put in some work to get them there. Now, if you listen to what Wes Montgomery told Joe DiOrio about practicing, it's clear that he didn't spend his practice time memorizing entire solos.
I said, Wes, what do you practice? I don't practice anything during the day that I don't use at night on the gig.
As you can hear, Wes was focused on playing music and improving his own playing by actually playing songs. Now here's a short side note. Ironically, Wes is the only artist where I learned an entire solo and I decided to call that song to play the solo on a gig, which by the way feels very strange. And the rhythm section probably also thought, what planet is he on today? Since there is no interaction when you do that. So yes, you learn a lot of essential things from learning a full solo, phrasing, timing, swing, but not vocabulary, unless you take a different approach. And luckily, Peter Bernstein has a recipe for that, and I'm gonna show you how it works. Check out how Peter Bernstein talks about his process for learning from solos.
I've never been one to really transcribe a lot of solos to the point where I had them under my fingers to play when I went to play with people. I would start to learn someone's solo, and then I would say, wow, look what they do over C7, and say, okay, when they do that, what does that mean? You know, how are they bringing out the notes of that chord? What notes are they leaning on? So it would tell me, okay, well, if I play the same that phrase, slightly different, but I can keep the idea of the phrase, then I'm learning how to make variations on something. So I would kind of learn bits and pieces of solos, but I don't have books of things written out. A lot of people do that. I just never had that. But I would take a phrase and then just that would be enough to set me to try to understand what that phrase is. To me, it's more important to really ingest the information as well as the phrasing and the feeling coming from the player. But
it's great to have such a detailed description from Peter Bernstein. Now let's explore how this approach might work with a solo phrase and a real song. This is one of my favorite ways to build real jazz vocabulary, and it's actually a lot of fun to work like this. Let's use the first part of Lady Bird. It's a nice, simple tune, but it also moves through a few different chords, which I think is perfect for this exercise. I'm going to start with this bebop phrase that I picked up from a Sonny Stitt solo. It works on a major 7 chord like this, and this might be a side note, but the first thing that I often check is if I can shift the rhythm an 8th note. Sometimes that can be really great for the phrase, but I think in this case it's not that fantastic. What do you think? Next, let's see if we can use the same phrase on the F-7 chord. Now the easiest way is simply to transpose it. Just move the whole phrase as if you're playing it on an A-flat major 7 chord. Now that relationship with F-7 and A-flat 7 often works both ways in terms of vocabulary and is really worth remembering. And you can even extend it to dominant chords, but I'll get to that. As I hinted at, you can use this version on the B-flat 7 as well. So if you have a dominant and you have a major 7 phrase, then try it from the 7th of the dominant, which in this case, of course, on B-flat 7 is A-flat. Now, you could also transpose it to B-flat 7 note for note, simply by looking at the intervals relative to the chord. That will give you this: 9th, root, 3rd, leading note, and then 7th. But another thing that Peter Bernstein mentions is stealing the idea. So one way to reduce this to an idea is to look at the original and turn that into sort of a melodic recipe. That could be diatonic leading note, chord tone, low chord tone, chromatic leading note, and then another chord tone. To me, the original is sort of built around the root of the chord, in this case, the C. And that was what I transposed to get the first B-flat 7 version. But with this new recipe, you could also build it around the 5th of B-flat 7, the F. And that will give you this line, which also works, but maybe is a little bit less pleasing than the original. Now the key takeaway here is that I'm not treating this as a strict formula. I'm just experimenting and seeing what sounds good. That's how you build real usable vocabulary. Now, a version around the 7th also sounds nice, even if it's a bit strange that the diatonic leading note is also a chord tone. And now that I'm playing around with it a bit, I realize that it could actually also be sort of a jazz blues phrase if you play it around the E flat. Sometimes you get new ideas just from messing around, and also that's where you find the things that shouldn't fit, but they actually do fit. Here it kind of becomes a B flat major pentatonic sound. But moving the phrase around some chords is only a part of the puzzle, because what is equally important is that you can put it to use in your own solos. Let's explore that next. If you're already used to working like this, you might find it easier to just play a song and use the new phrase, gradually making it a part of your vocabulary. But often the best place to start is by composing lines using the new phrase. Now the big advantage here is that there's no pressure from the rhythm or the tempo. You can take your time, experiment, and come up with material that you actually like and that fits your style. You might even discover something new along the way. Let's stick with the original phrase on C major 7. And I feel like adding something to it to make it a full phrase. So here's a few chord tones and a passing note plus an enclosure. And another side note, when I play this, I actually hear it come back on the F minor 7 with this transition. But let's keep things focused. Try placing the phrase in the second bar of C major 7 and lead into it, maybe with an arpeggio. Of course, this is something that you want to spend time on while you're also putting these phrases to use in your solos to really get them into your playing. Now you know how to learn solos and how to get the most out of them, but that won't get you anywhere if you don't know which solos to learn. Now this video covers some of the solos that I learned really a lot from and that I've given to students often to see them level up as well. Plus some tips on how to learn by ear. Great, short and easy solos is the way to go. Check it out. Learn jazz, make music.